Welcome, everybody. Another year's gone by, and I'm pleased to have back Graham and Amandine to talk about Kantar BrandZ, or do you say BrandZ? Which one is it?
We say
BrandZ.
BrandZ.
Okay, you say BrandZ because you're global, and most of the top brands are coming from North America, right?
We
So
are.
we are here to talk about this year's brand rankings that came out on June the 15th, top 100 global brands. And just for those people that perhaps didn't see our interview last year, would you like to both introduce yourselves?
So I am leading the evaluation for Kantar BrandZ. We are actually a global team, and we are doing all the evaluations for all the rankings, not only global, but all the country rankings that we're publishing every year.
Hi, I'm Graham. My roles span the research, so gathering the data that feeds into the valuations from consumers, and also then analysis and writing conclusions and finding out the most useful insights for marketers from the work that we do.
Fantastic. So, one of the things that I want to start with, and it's because I've been involved in a number of workshops, talks with branding professionals, and the same topic always crops up, which is measuring a brand, whether that's effectiveness, awareness, preference, top of those sorts of things. So, how do you measure brands, and what goes into the rankings that you put together?
Well, I'll start and then I'll hand over to Amandine to talk about the second part of that question, because you're absolutely right. Brands are very complicated. We've got a lovely quote from Jeremy Bullmore where he says that brands are slippery, half virtual, half real things. And they're very, very hard to pin down because actually, most of the time, as consumers, as decision makers, we're not actually thinking about brands very much. They're not a hugely important part of our lives. And as marketers, obviously they're massively important, but we tend to overstate, exactly the role that a brand is going to play in a consumer's lives. We don't, for example, that there are brands out there that have any significant number of people that love them. People talk about getting a brand tattooed on your shoulder or whatever. That's a tiny, tiny, tiny percent of the time that things like that happen. And then we have the fact that marketing itself is very complex. We live in complex world. We're exposed to hundreds of brands every day. And really what's happening in consumers' heads is that all that activity, all the marketing activity that goes on, all the encounters that you have with brands, whether they're first hand or second, third hand, they're all making tiny little connections in your brain. And most of the time, you don't even consciously process those. You might register them. A little connection is formed. Advertising, for example, works on brands because you just keep repeating a little connection, and that forms a neural pathway in your brain. And eventually, that can be useful because then when you're trying to get the reverse of that happening, so an advertiser is pushing a brand and making a connection. When you actually see a brand and you're thinking about, oh, is that a brand I want to buy? You reverse that, you use that neural pathway, it triggers some associations in your mind. So we have to be sensitive to the fact that brands aren't very important to people. They can't often articulate how they feel about them in a conscious way. So we have to go in and use a whole variety of tools. But basically, most of our data is collected still using a survey-based approach. We ask people a variety of questions. Those neural pathways in their brain, and we see the extent to which different aspects of are seen positively. But it is relatively complicated. So we have a relatively complicated model. And then we try and create some simple outputs out of it. So we look at what's the demand power of a brand, what's the pricing power of a brand, what's the future power of a brand. And we look at the brand's contribution. And that's where we hand over to Amandine.
Yes, so the next part is like valuing the brand, because brands are actually valuable assets for the company. They are leveraging that asset. And when you talk about brand value, consumer perceptions is important, as well as how companies are using these brands and using this equity to generate shareholder value. So we put that consumer perception at the heart of our methodology. We start with calculating the financial value, and then we are using the BrandZ survey data to understand how much of this financial value is actually driven by brand equity alone. And that gives you the brand value that is used to rank the brands in the global top 100.
So, would I be right in assuming then that you're using hard and soft measures, big data, thick data, and going back to what you were saying, Graham, that you are essentially trying to draw things that are from people's unconscious into their consciousness by basically asking the question?
Yeah. I mean, the data, is hard on Amandine's side. It's the financial facts that are published, the analysis that we can do on those, supplemented with other types of data to help make sure that we've broken it down in the right way. That if you've got a big complicated company with many brands, we've got to take their financials and do some quite forensic analysis on it. But on my side, from the research side, we've got big data too, because we're talking to hundreds of thousands of consumers every year. We've got something like 18,000 brands in our database in total, and we've covered many of them in 20 or 30 countries around the world. And so, again, part of what the valuation process is to break down all of the sales and the revenue and the profit from those different regions of the world and line those up to the consumer attitudes that persist there. People might like Coca-Cola a lot in the States. They might like it a bit less in say, France. And so we have to look at all of the individual components of where the brand is getting its revenue streams from, and how each of those is driven by consumers individually. So yeah, complicated, big in terms of the data that we have to draw on.
That makes our methodology very rich, because you have the brand value number, but you have also all these consumer data to understand in each market their perception. So it's not only about how much, it's also about why and how.
Yeah.
So let me ask a difficult question, Amandine. What do you think of marketing and branding academics that publish these journal papers that don't have access to the data points and the tens of thousands of brands that you guys have? And please be honest. What views do you have of some of the stuff that you've read?
In which generally all the marketing people?
Yeah, in general. I mean, I'm probably shooting myself in the foot, but having gone to academic conferences or read journal papers, often you see the number of brands being analysed, or the number of consumers, or the number of questions that academics are able to have access to and analyse is far, far less than what you're producing. But at the same time, these scholars and academics are wanting to prove new conceptual theories, models, which perhaps, is it questionable that they can generalize their findings in such a way? I mean, I think of, a number of brands where you can kind of, they could take Coca-Cola, for example, take Apple, for example, and they won't be going into detail to the level that you are, the granular detail of particular markets, particular categories, because we just don't have the time, the muscle, the resources, all of those things. So if I wanted to be provocative, do you think that a lot of us academics are wasting our time trying to do it?
It's not a waste of time, because there are still some interesting findings, and we're actually working with some academics. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about it, Graham, because you worked with some business school, and so
BrandZ isn't exactly open source, okay, but we are very open to working with people in academia to share our data on an appropriate basis. But look, I think in answer to your sort of first part of your question, If you are a medical researcher, you have to start off with small trials. You have to try things out. You have to look to see if you've got any evidence to go on. Now, we happen to have more data that we can then check those sorts of hypotheses. We can, look to see how well our data from surveys correlates with sales, correlates with all sorts of other things. I'm doing some work at the moment to try and compare with Amandine. We're trying to compare to see if measures of pricing power among brands relate to increased profitability in companies. Now, it's quite, it's the sort of thing where you could do it on a couple of categories and see it. Do you get any sort of relationship? Does it look like this is worthwhile? And then if it is, and we're starting actually on a relatively small base to start off with, because as you said, gathering data together isn't always easy. But having got that, we can then go on and see if we can prove it on larger cases and to generalize it. But I think there's another point I would bring up, and that's that if we look across the world's most valuable brands, we see that actually they come from everywhere. We've got car brands, we've got luxury brands, we've got technology brands, we've got food and drink brands, we've got personal care brands, and we've got clothing brands. So I think in general, everything that I've seen in terms of the data, the models that we use are the same in B2B as they are in B2C. But I mean, small adaptations, but the fundamentals are the same. And that's because human brains are all the same. And in the end, as I said at the beginning, it's what we're trying to get into people's heads and the way that our brains work.
Okay, so I like that because I remember having a chat the other day and saying from my position, I think that the same brand theory applies whether that's a person or a celebrity right up to a country, a product, service, whatever, B2B, B2C. The only difference is it's more complicated to brand a country as opposed to an individual. And some people raise their eyebrows, but I'm kind of reassured by some of the things that you were saying that maybe there's some truth in there. I don't know.
Well, look, a brand is a virtual thing. I mean, yes, there are real world manifestations of brands. There are the packaging, the product, the people that give it to you or whatever else. But all of those are things that create impressions in your mind, and your brain has to assemble what we call a representation of a concept from all the memories and the associations, all the connections that you've got to it. And that's no different from forming a representation of your grandmother or a representation of Afghanistan. There's all of those things. They're just human concepts that we assemble in our brain, and a brand is just the same as that. I mean, if you're trying to make a country into a brand or manage a country brand, obviously you've got a hell of a lot less that you can control. If you're marketing Heinz beans, there's a lot more that you can control.
Yeah, true. And another thing, I very much believe in the cultural approach to branding. So one of the things I've said is that brands are influenced by culture and culture is influenced by brands. And that is especially with obviously the top global brands. So how much time should brands spend on cultural relevance over, say, for example, some of the other financial aspects, or thinking of the functional value of a particular product or service? That often is a debate as well, where some people at the extreme say that branding is all about storytelling and painting pictures in your mind, and notionally, if you have a strong brand, then the product will follow. And then other people like to build it from an alternative perspective. And I heard someone, it was Justin, talking the other day about, say, for example, NFTs and kind of how that's spun on its head, where essentially you're creating a brand and the product follows, as opposed to once upon a time where you could be an artisan and then you create something of good quality and worth, you put your name on it so people can recognize it and find you, and then hopefully that grows and grows.
So what we know with our research is when you are strong on brand equity, our four three pillars of brand equity, your value increase. So that's one of the fundamental. Having the fundamental rights give you growth. So that's one of the most important things.
And those three pillars, that's being meaningful, being different, and being salient. And I think from a cultural context, two of those are really, really important. I mean, the first one is salience. Culturally, we go through waves of what's popular, and sometimes things are popular, then they become less popular, then they become more popular again. Bell-bottom trousers or Eurovision Song Contest suddenly become all popular again, and is a cultural wave, and you get bigger trends going through culture, and I wouldn't necessarily say attitudes to climate change are cultural. I don't know if you would, but it is. The way that we talk about things like climate change becomes, part of our culture as well. So if you're going to be a salient brand, it's certainly going to be helpful if you're tapping into whatever is more culturally relevant to more people at any given time. But on the other side, being meaningful is also important. If you just, start trying to say, oh, we're saving the planet, and your product doesn't have anything to do with that, that's not a meaningful message to people. So it's going to make much less of a connection in your mind.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And I made some notes. There was a quote that I saw recently. Amandine, you can correct me because my French is not very good, but Raymond Loewy, industrial designer, tastemaker, and brand legend. But he said that consumers are torn between two opposing forces: neophilia, a curiosity about new things, and neophobia, a fear of anything too new. And so he felt that people gravitate towards products that are bold but instantly recognizable and comprehensible. And he said that to sell something surprising, you need to make it familiar, and to sell something familiar, you need to make it surprising. And I kind of liked that. So my summary takeaway from reading that was, basically you need to make something familiar, slightly new, common but not too common, and intriguing. But let's get into the rankings and let's talk about some of those areas that we looked at. So one of the things that jumped out at me, well, a lot of things jumped out at me, was Louis Vuitton. Going from number 21 in last year in 2021's rankings to number 10 in 2022. A luxury brand in the top 10 rankings. Is that first?
Yep.
Yes, it is. It is the first. It's also the first European brand in the top 10 since 2010.
Wow.
Yeah, amazing growth, amazing growth. Strong asset, recognizable by consumers. A luxury category that grew very fast as well. We have two categories which grew faster than the rest, actually a little bit more, but the two fastest risers are consumer technology and luxury. Very, very nice growth for Louis Vuitton and also other luxury brands like Cartier, which is also our top riser.
Yeah, so I was fascinated by that because I also noticed that the growth in luxury and technology. What do you think this says? Because I was then thinking, is that these sectors are doing really good branding, or is that a reflection on the way that we're consuming and our state of mind, that we want this kind of escapism, this exclusivity, this aspirational aspect, almost a distraction from pandemic and all of these things, but at the same time we're hardwired into technology because we're Zooming and all of these others?
I think both plays here. There is like a consumer behavior shift where nobody could really spend on experience or travel, etc. Consumer goods increased a little bit and more spending were made on luxury. And on top of that, the branding is important, as I said, for Louis Vuitton, strong asset and strong brand, same for Hermes. Apple, I don't think we have said it already, but Apple is our new number one. and and this growth is driven by strong sale across like its portfolio, like a very strong diversification.
So, and I think that's a really interesting point, because actually Amandine and I have a little fight every year over the idea of breaking brands down into categories. I mean, isn't Apple a luxury brand, actually? And the luxury brands are getting increasingly tech enabled. If you go online in China, you find some of the platforms. Alibaba now has a luxury pavilion online where and during the pandemic and lockdown, brands like Louis Vuitton and so on had to work out very quickly, but very successfully, how to be online virtual technological brands to satisfy their customers.
So I guess we've seen a shifting pattern as well in how we interpret, classify luxury, right? Because once upon a time, luxury brands would have spurned those opportunities. It was the exclusivity was also about being absent from certain platforms because you don't be associated with other brands. But obviously, if you're online in a shop, people can scroll through and they can see you next to something else. And I was struck by, there was an announcement that Amazon are opening a luxury platform on their website, right, in Europe. I think it's in Spain, Germany, France, Italy, and the UK. And so this idea that they understood that people trust them as a platform, they have great return services, you've got your account set up, but this idea of coming from being a book seller to now things, high ticket items on Amazon, but with a different kind of shop front, right, with more videos and more content wrapped around it, I think is quite a change, right? I remember 20 years ago being in the online space, and we used to laugh at some of these websites that you could buy a fur coat online or a car. And 20 years ago we said, like, who would spend like £20,000 purchasing a car online? How do you know? There'd be lots of how. You haven't seen it, you haven't smelt it, you haven't driven it. But we're kind of there now, right? If luxury brands are doing these things.
Yeah, more and more luxury companies are increasing their sales online. They are using like online platform, as you said. There is also a shift in consumer like behaviors. We are buying following the pandemic, which was actually a very big boost. It was a catalyst for this type of trend. People are buying more goods online, and there is also the fact that those brands need to appeal to younger generation, more tech savvy, and which are buying more online. And we are now shopping also on Instagram, or all those apps. So yes, it's also a way to attract a new audience. And talking about new audience, and still talking about luxury, Tiffany is also a new entrant in our ranking in our top 10 luxury brands. And so you probably know that they were acquired by LVMH a couple of years ago, end of 2020. And LVMH kind of revamped their communication. It was much younger. They had this new campaign about not your mother, Tiffany, to attract like younger consumers.
And they've been really successful with that. Our data shows that, and the fact that they had been in the luxury ranking a few years ago had dropped out. Other brands were being more successful, were growing more within that category. And of course, the rankings that we do aren't just powered by sort of the brands that are there already. There's a continual fight. The threshold for entry went up again massively this year. So to get into the top 100, it went up from I think just over 18 billion to over 20 billion this year. So it's like you can't even just stand still as a big brand. To your point, you've got to keep finding ways to refresh that brand and to surprise and bring something new, because other people are starting with that new thing and making it more familiar and scaling their business up and pushing in. I mean, we had Airbnb has come into the ranking in the top 100 this year for the first time, and they're doing a phenomenal job of marketing. And I think it's been really interesting in the last year to see actually the majority or a large amount of their marketing spend has been on recruiting people to be hosts on the platform, because they've done such a good job of creating demand. So they need more capacity for people to come on. And I thought that's been a really interesting example of a brand that's taken something new and different and has scaled it up absolutely successfully.
Okay, so that's really interesting, because I remember the eye-watering 18 billion figure last year, and so now it's 20 billion to enter the top 100 club.
Yeah.
Wow. And I was listening to all the things that you were saying, thinking about luxury, and Louis Vuitton has been good at also championing causes as well, right? Because I mean, they have Virgil Abloh, who sadly has passed away, but I remember that I think it was the winter collection where there was a hark back to the 90s, where you had Wu-Tang Clan, Goldie, drum and bass, samurai swords. It very much appealed to my era. And then you mentioned Tiffany moving away from the kind of Audrey Hepburn look. And I remember, a few years ago, there being outfits with Zoe Kravitz in them and things like that, and using Aerosmith's Dream On. And you would read the pundits' opinions, and they were kind of almost exclusively saying, yeah, they're trying to go for the young people, but it's a mistake. Brands shouldn't do that. They're losing their heritage. But what you're saying is actually it's very smart, because at the end of the day, if you look at the rankings, they've gone up, and that's a very good indicator.
Yeah, I mean, I think heritage is a really interesting area that brands have to deal with, because I think we're very, very clear that consistency in key areas of marketing is really, really helpful. Building up, as Amandine was saying, the sort of brand assets, the recognizability that Louis Vuitton or Coca-Cola and McDonald's or majority of the other top 100 brands, you see that brand and you instantly bring stuff to mind. And as I said at the very beginning, we're all sort of interested in many, many other things than brands on the whole during our everyday lives. So to actually change those accumulated connections in your brain takes a lot of effort. So if you are going to try and do something new and different, you've really got to go for it. And you've absolutely got to say, right, how can I repackage what I am and take that with me, but give it a new shape, give it a new form?
So let's think about McDonald's, actually, because, I mean, they were number 9 in 2021, and they are number 6 this year.
Yep.
And I remember going to Moscow and queuing up to have a Big Mac in 1999. And 30 years later, they've made the decision this year to withdraw from Russia for good, apart from protecting the Golden Arches as a trademark. So would this be an example of one of those bold decisions that's brand protecting, building for the future, where, because some people might debate, I'm sure that there are many brands that are hedging their bets and thinking that, once the conflict is over in a few years' time, they're going to enter again. But McDonald's has made a very strong statement in saying that that's it. And I did also think about what that means for global brands in terms of rankings. If we're going to see these divides where different nations will choose not to enter particular markets for whatever reason that is, and that will either bring new brands or it will kind of, I think it's going to be fascinating.
Not necessarily to McDonald's, but to your point on seeing brands from every part of the world, it's already starting, because we have brands from Latin America entering the top 100. They are building their ecosystem in South America. The brand is Mercado Libre. And we have something also in Southeast Asia, Shopee. So they are in a different way, not doing politics or here talking about like Ukraine, but commercially they are already brands which are growing regionally based on their local strengths and the knowledge of the local consumer instead of having a global brand spreading across the world.
Which is good news, right? Because I know that, you know, we could say that the power of brands, the value brands, has gone up since the previous year. And I also noticed that, you know, America still dominates, right? But there's
Yes.
been an increased percentage brand value in Europe and the rest of the world. I think you said China slipped a little by 7%. But it is, you know, good news to see that the rest of the world is kind of, you know, is entering in this way.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that technology does. I mean, you know, you have a technological lead, maybe, you know, in a lot of the US businesses, you know, in the old world, the IBMs and so on, and in the new world, you know, sort of, you know, it's Instagram and you know, even Airbnb. But, you know, an Airbnb can come from anywhere. Spotify, you know, is a Swedish brand, a technology platform. These e-commerce platforms. We've seen, you know, payment brands in India. We've seen, you know, technologies coming from anywhere. In fact, India's contributed now 2 brands in that sort of B2B tech space. Tata Consulting and Infosys are both in the top 100, and we can see that there's a, you know, particularly maybe an unintended effect of the pandemic has been for people to work more from home. More remote working means you can be anywhere in the world. And people are just as intelligent anywhere in the world. Education is pretty good just about anywhere in the world now. So, you know, those great entrepreneurial technological ideas, we don't know where they're going to come from. They could literally come from anywhere, and you know, we can increasingly see that now is the time that those ideas can mature much faster, can scale and grow faster, and can bring that value to people faster.
And I guess as well, it could be a good solution to some of, you know, some countries, emerging economies especially, have suffered from a brain drain where their brightest minds go to more developed economies. If we can work more remotely, then potentially that knowledge can stay in your home territory, and that could be good for brands as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing really interesting innovations, whether it's in financial services or retailing or technology in a more general sense, but applications of technology in all sorts of places around the world. And, you know, people thought that maybe that Europe was done, and, you know, it was, you know, going to sink economically compared to the rest of the world, but I don't think that's likely to be the case. You know, we've seen, although Tesla continues its massive growth, what it's done is dragged the rest of the car industry, kicking and screaming, perhaps a bit, into the electric vehicle world, and we can see, you know, the impact that that's having, and that the brands like BMW and Mercedes, you know, from Germany, that have caught onto that, VW and so on, and they're adapting faster perhaps than some of the other brands, and they're continuing to deliver, you know, reasonably good growth for those brands as well. However, new challenges can emerge from anywhere. So new in our automotive ranking this year is BYD from China, electric vehicle manufacturer. I was surprised it was the only one that entered, actually. I think there may well be another one or two up and coming. But BYD, I learned, stands for Build Your Dreams. And that's exactly what, you know, great entrepreneurs are doing in, you know, and using marketing to build their dreams as well, and create amazing new brands.
Yeah, it was interesting because Tesla, what, they rose from 47 to 29.
Yeah.
How tied in do you think is Elon Musk's mouth to their brand? Because I'm also thinking about his a memo to staff asking them to be on site 40 hours a week while everyone else is enjoying experimenting with hybrid working, and that didn't seem to get universal appeal. Do you think we're going to see a situation where, a bit like Lululemon, where their founder, became increasingly embarrassing and they had to separate themselves from the brands? Do you think that Tesla runs that risk, or Musk is hardwired in, and that's going to be the thing that drives success?
Interesting one. I mean, there are certainly plenty of cases actually where, other cases where founders have had to be separated from the brand for the success of the brand. And I think, marketing. I was thinking about your question about the challenges of being a responsible brand and what that means, and how do you apply that to everybody in a fair way around the world. And I think that's another one of these examples. If you want to succeed in the world today as a brand, you've got to be responsible. We've got good evidence that not that it necessarily drives a huge amount of demand for brands. People don't start by looking for, first thing I want in a car is that it's made by a responsible company. No, what I want from a car is that it gets me from A to B. It's safe, it's reliable, it's economic, and so on. But these trust and responsibility factors do have a role to play, and in particular in a world where the physical product or the actual service you receive can be so easily matched, then it's these smaller, apparently trivial, sometimes intangible qualities that brands have that tip people one way or another, that do affect decisions. And as I said, it's sort of like very easy to poo-poo them and say, well, no, we've got to make sure that we've got 4 wheels and an engine and so on. But actually, when you come down to it, every car manufacturer has a good range of cars that tick any of the boxes that you're looking for. So then how do you choose? And it's going to be down to these, less processed, less rational concepts in your head, and much more down to those little emotional pushes, and personalities can be one of those things. So I would say, in terms of Tesla, you've got, in one sense, Elon Musk is sort of more known actually still for being Elon Musk than he is for Tesla. And I don't think everybody going out to test drive a Tesla or potentially to look at one is actually thinking very much about him. So, I think he sort of can bring Tesla to people, but I don't think actually he's been, particularly as far as I can see, damaging to the brand in any way. That's not to say he might not be, and it can always happen.
So it's interesting because I'm kind of, we've spoken about culture and we kind of touched upon activism, and I know that in your press release you mentioned that Louis Vuitton had been strong at supporting Black Lives Matter, right? And if we look at sustainability, there's some other stuff that I saw which was, you're saying that's increasingly important for a brand. It's driving 3% of brand equity, but few consumers recognize brands for it. I mean, you've cited on your index Microsoft, Zara, and IBM as leading the way. But do you think recognition for sustainability is something that brands should work on, or is it a sensitive area where, we've seen a number of brands that have been cut out already by advertising standards for making unsubstantiated claims or being found guilty of greenwashing? So whether that's Coldplay coming out of lockdown and talking about their tour and the fuel that they're using, whether that's, I think this week, plastic grass being better for the environment in your garden, or meat-free burgers, and now people are really down and saying, okay, just having a meat-free diet itself doesn't necessarily mean that you can make that claim of being sustainable. So what do you think, these brands, is this a risk too far? I mean, yes, I agree that businesses have to do these things, but for us in branding, I guess the other side is how closely you associate that and visibly with your image, identity, personality, message, for fear that you might be accused of kind of, inflating your claims.
Can I talk a little bit about it? Just sustainability, business-wise, beyond the brand. Greenwashing is damaging, of course, the reputation of the company and the brand. And the risk is when the cost of working on sustainability is very high and they need like a short gain or something like that. But among the in our rankings, so I guess Graham will talk a little bit about our sustainability index, where we combine ESG data from MSCI and our sustainability data in our database. Microsoft rank among the top, and that's also one of its growth driver. It's recognized by the investor, so it is important.
There are different sorts of businesses out there and different sorts of brands. If you are a big established business with a heritage, an infrastructure that has existed for 20, 30, 40 years, then it's incumbent on you as a business to look at that and say to yourself, what can we be doing to improve the footprint of that, the environmental impact of it. But you don't get brownie points for just catching up, for just trying to rectify the errors of the past. We absolutely see that. So you need to address it. Do you talk about it as a core part of your brand messaging? Probably not. But on the other hand, if you do have something that is significant, that is new, and if you have a brand that maybe is either, or originates in the idea of we want to do this, but we want to do it in a different way, then absolutely there's a role for those brands. Now, in between, it might well be that you need to at least let people know that you are addressing issues. You might at least need to let people know that you're trying to do those things. And if, as I say, there are cases, and I think it's been very, very interesting to follow McDonald's in terms of, they are communicating a lot, whether it's about recycling their oil, sourcing their product from more local places, recyclable packaging, everything that they're doing. No, but it is absolutely right that you could also say, but you're also now fueling a huge amount of delivery trucks and bikes and everything that are going around, and maybe that's the next thing that they need to address. How do they demonstrate that is being done in a more environmentally friendly way? But I think there's a bigger thing here, and that is about what are brands for. Brands are there to create value. If we go back 100 years, brands were only interested in creating value for shareholders. End of. As we move through like late last century, brands started to be much more conscious about actually the idea of the win-win and creating value for customers as well as value for their shareholders. We're now moving into a world where the phrase "a triple bottom line's been coined," and brands are there to create value for shareholders, to create value for customers, and to create value for the people and planet, around them beyond their business. And I think that all companies are starting to get that message, are starting to understand and embrace it, and marketing, really needs to help get that, that that activity right, because you can have the best marketing campaign totally undermined by not doing the right thing behind the scenes in your business. And I think it is also true that if you're doing all the right things in your business, there potentially are times when it is valuable to talk about those with consumers. And I think it's just finding the right time, sensing the right time, not overclaiming, not trying to, suggest every little thing you're doing is going to save the world. And I think, the seen a lot of different examples of brands that did things quietly during the pandemic and got credit for it, and brands that tried to maybe overclaim what they were doing, and people see through it. So I think, that's where it's a tightrope to walk. It does depend on where you're coming from, as well as where you want to get to, and the point along that journey when you can start to talk to people about it. But absolutely, the first thing is that you got to get your house in order.
So, I mean, kind of going back to Black Lives Matter, I remember it was interesting because for a lot of people that was either a light bulb or a light switch moment where it shone a spotlight on the legacy of slavery and what's happening to various communities. And some brands had to pivot very quickly and rename and rebrand. Obviously not the ones in the top 100, but I can think, for example, in London, Cass Business School changing to Bayes Business School. There were other brands in the US, food brands, that changed their name. And they seem to be caught between a rock and a hard place in many ways, because you don't acknowledge the importance of change and you're going to get hammered, or you change and people go, oh, so you only changed because everybody started complaining.
Yeah.
And then you're now under scrutiny, so that it's, you change but you don't have representation in your organization, or you suddenly have representation in your organization, and
it's token, or
basically.
Look, absolutely, and I think, whether we're talking about environmental issues, social issues, windfall profit taxes, all these sorts of different areas, absolutely, need to, each one be assessed and handled. But look, I think marketing shouldn't be a reason not to do the right thing in your business. Just because it makes marketing's job harder, then the marketers can bloody well work harder. And that's just a challenge that they have to face. Marketers had to work very, very hard at BP after the Gulf of Mexico spill. But they couldn't have ignored it. They couldn't have gone past it. You had to address it. So if you've got a reputational crisis of any sort, it's the first thing is facing up to it, doing something about it, and then continuing along a path. Having a good vision of where you want to get to, and actually, trying to take your customers with you, I think, is important. There's a very small brand of butter in the US called Land O'Lakes, and been around for a very long time. Farmers cooperative origin type brand, and for many, many years, up until very recently, they had a Native American lady on the front of their pack. Not huge, actually, just like a small image as part of the iconography. They, did a lot of work to understand, whether or not that actually was difficult for people. Was it appropriate, inappropriate? Why? And then they took it off. They've kept the name Land O'Lakes. Fortunately, they've got a name, unlike, say, Uncle Ben's, where it was the whole name that was, a lot of the issue. And there's also an Aunt Jemima syrup brand, which has had the same, it's almost identical issue. But, with Land O'Lakes, it was a really good example because, they talk to themselves, they talk to their customers, they talk to the wider community. So again, it's this triple idea about the business, the customers, and the wider world. And it's about marketing's, impact on and ability to create value for all of those different groups. They've taken it off. I don't think it's hurt their sales. I think they've gone through that, and they've decided that that's the right thing for the future.
So, summarising what you're saying from a brand perspective, it's very much about, loud and clear I'm hearing, do the right thing, no matter how hard, take people on a journey, and look to the horizon, play and play the long game, because you basically have no alternative.
Yeah.
Standing still isn't going to help you in the rankings because there are so many things happening and changing. No, I think that's really good advice, and I hope that people watching are reassured by those things. And I also remember that there was a quote that you had in your press release as well, where you said, "Strong brand affinity underpins a customer's willingness to pay, and that has never been more important for organisations looking to offset spiking inflation."
Yeah.
So that's another thing that's kind of on the horizon as well, right? Living costs are going up. Inflation, is causing challenges for many businesses. Even this week, seeing the price of potatoes, fish and oil having a massive effect on fish and chips in the UK, where they're saying that was at £12 in some fish and chip restaurants, which to me is just what? So, but investing in your branding is an important thing to do, right? So
Yeah.
let's look at diversification as being one of those things, because I think that's another thing that you've highlighted in your findings. And my favorite one as well is this week there was the drop of Gucci and Adidas. So I'm a fan of Gucci from a brand perspective because they had the House of Gucci movie, they got into NFTs. If you think about from the 90s to then when Tom Ford was involved to where they are now, and there are some there are eye-watering prices for Adidas. If you wanted to buy Adidas, it was a pair of socks, a pair of tube socks was £155. Gucci Adidas tube socks. So, that's pretty eye-watering to me. But do you think that collaborations and diversification are important things for brands to do if they want to build their brand power and go up the rankings?
Yes, it is important, but they need to find the right partner and the right diversification. It has to be aligned with the core of what they do and aligned with their overall communication. That's very important. But we have seen different brands collaborating with each other very, very successfully. The principal example I can mention is tech brands help a lot of other fast food brands or consumer brands to grow, but then there are other type of partnership within B2B or B2C. So yes, it's important to help them to grow. There is also a kind of blurring the line between categories, so they need to grow not only vertically but also horizontally, I believe.
Have you seen any examples of where it's gone wrong? Because you said finding the right partner, where it just screams out that it's like big mistake.
Well, I mean, the classic one I tend to talk about from the UK is WH Smith as diversifying to the point where you've no idea what sort of shop they are anymore or why you'd want to bother to go in there. And I think that's a bit harsh maybe, but and yeah, I understand. You are known as a news agent and a bookstore. Amazon steals all the book sales, and no one much is buying a newspaper anymore. So what do you do? But unfortunately, the way that they've gone about trying to retain a place on the high street has just been to sort of almost randomly sell anything. So again, you don't know why you go there. So I think that brands like that diversify without a purpose. I think it's interesting to contrast them in the UK with Boots, for example, that almost went down the same route and have pulled themselves back to really central core of health and beauty, and to really focus innovation in those areas, whether it's again in terms of product innovation, because they're a huge manufacturer as well as a retailer, or to look at just the selection of things that they sell and what they don't sell. And I think, again, they were in danger of becoming maybe, way too of a diversified store. But it's interesting, there are cases absolutely where diversification or creating an ecosystem is actually essential to survive. We've been tracking brands in India for quite a while, and in telecoms, huge amount of disruption happened when this brand called Jio came along in India, offering basically free and near free data, where the incumbents were all, making a huge amount of profit out of high priced data. And, they weren't price fixing, but they weren't trying to maybe compete as much as they could have done. And, that's led to, an enforced collaboration on the one side. So Vodafone and Idea have both merged into a new brand called VI or Vi, but actually also Airtel, the sort of incumbent, the leader in the market, diversified itself and sort of brought new products and services to consumers. Yes, they had to bring their prices down, but actually they can still charge more than Geo, and they've still grown because of that. So I think there's some really interesting examples there of, sort of brands that get it right. And maybe, Vodafone and Idea in India just didn't quite have that strength and depth that they really needed to survive such a cataclysmic change as, wiping out the market for data, or massively reducing it in that way. And I think, you never know where that disruptor is going to come from. I'm sure that they had plans to, sort of continue on, but they had to retrench in the face of that. So I think, that we can see different examples from different parts of the world, where it might be because of a disruption. It might just be because you've reached your ceiling and you're looking around, and where do I grow next? Where do I create value for my business? And actually, and profit is really important in that, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. And it just make me think about an example that we have this year is AT&T. They try to go into media on their own. So they bought a media company. They try to have their channel, etc. It does not work as expected, and now they are divesting this entire business and work with a partner more experienced in that area to help them. So there are also brands that try on their own or bought something and then realize that maybe they should work in another way.
Yeah, media's been a massive growth, right? I mean, was it CNN withdrew, right? It was CNN, wasn't it? Quite quickly that they were going to produce some new content, but obviously we can see Netflix, Disney Plus, which seems to be producing content upon content. The Marvel universe is getting huge, and now they've got Obi-Wan Kenobi back with a vengeance, and they had the Book of Boba Fett, and it's frightening how much content just seems to be out there, and I wonder what's going to happen with Disney Plus in the future. But yeah, definitely the online streaming platforms, media, entertainment, and I guess there are probably going to be some big partnerships in a few years' time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an area where they're still in rapid growth phase. I mean, we're all discussing here, how much inflation is going to hit subscriber services. Are people going to start deselecting and so on? But I think in general, we're probably still going to see a growth in that market. There's still plenty of new customers out there for the services to win. But yeah, it comes back to, have you got something that is distinct and different and attractive that you can then scale up? And that's exactly what Disney Plus have done with the Marvel and the Star Wars universes. And I think again, part of our analysis this year has proven that brands that grew started with something different. And in fact, actually, the brands that grew most tended to be the ones that were maybe a little bit smaller and had that ability to grow much more. And so, you need to look around at what makes you different as a brand. And if you're not already exploiting it, or if you don't have any, you've got to find something and you've got to exploit it. And there's been a lot of discussion in some areas of marketing that you can't differentiate, that it's just about having a few distinctive assets. But I think that talking to Disney or to Louis Vuitton or to Alibaba or to any of these brands in the top 100, they would say what we're trying to do is, yes, be distinctive and recognizable and individual and so on, but also we've got to have our own set of associations that make us stand out in the minds of consumers. Because in the end, why would you pay more for something that wasn't different? If you could get the same thing for less money. Now, okay, there are plenty of brands that trade on value. I'm not saying you can't trade on value. Aldi's in our top 100 this year. And they do an absolutely brilliant job of trading on value, but it's value with a difference.
Yeah, and it's surprising as well with Aldi how many other supermarkets mention them in their adverts now to say our prices are comparable to Aldi's, which to me just seems to be a dumb thing to do. I'm going to say I think it's a dumb thing, because why do I want to use my money to mention another brand's name in my advert that I have no partnership or collaboration with? You're building their brand power.
It's a challenging for them. I mean, I'm sure that they've tried a range of different communication solutions.
Yeah, but you mentioned Alibaba, so we should give them a shout out, because they were number 7 in 2021. Sorry, and they're number 9, so they're still there. But Tencent has also maintained its position at number 5. So that's 2 powerful Chinese brands in the top 10.
Yep.
And just for those of you that don't have it in front of you, if I just remind you, the top 10 last year in 2021, from number 1 to number 10 is Amazon, Apple, Google, Microsoft, Tencent, Facebook, Alibaba, Visa, McDonald's, MasterCard. And this year, it's Apple number 1, followed by Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Tencent, McDonald's, Visa, Facebook, Alibaba, and Louis Vuitton.
And Apple this year, over 900 billion in value.
Yeah.
I was astonished when we had our first $500 billion brand. But to think that we could easily have a trillionaire brand next year, and maybe more than one, who knows? The way things are going is just going to be absolutely amazing. The entire top 100 when we started doing this back in 2006 was, I think, 1.4 trillion.
Yes.
So, you're getting effectively 2 brands now, which if you put them together are worth what 100 brands were worth 16 years ago.
And I liked that at the beginning of our chat, you said brands aren't very important to consumers, but they seem to be very valuable or worth a lot. They're bringing in a lot of money.
Well, that's just it. I mean, brands are important to consumers as part of their pension fund, I suspect, much more than they are in terms of what they're buying every day.
Okay, so I mean, I've kept you guys for longer than I should have, but a couple of things before we start to wind up. Just to hammer home that point, there are some brand managers that are watching this, and they're in medium-sized organizations or small organizations, and they keep getting hammered in the boardroom for having to demonstrate the power of the brand. What should we measure? What metrics should we pay attention to? And how do we demonstrate our worth, in opposition to the very much here and now where, a lot of people are being judged according to, let's call them vanity statistics on social media, sales, where effectively we're not evaluating brands, we're evaluating sales and marketing and how many units are being sold this month. And that's not how brands work. So what advice would you give as to things that they could measure and ways that they could defend their corner in the boardroom?
So I'm going to start with my financial opinion. When you show the first thing that they can do is actually show the value of the brand and how much they're contributing to the overall value of the company. For some, it's actually a shock. They don't realize how much the brand is important in the consumer purchase decision and how much it contributes to their value. So that's the first thing, the dollar amount. And then maybe I will turn over to Graham, but a framework that tells you how to grow that value, something validated, and you can track with consistency over years is also important.
Yeah. I mean, I think I wouldn't leave the financials behind, because I think there's two things. I mean, yes, sales go up and down, but it's not too difficult, even for a small business, to look at underlying base sales. And if your underlying base sales are trending up, that's what marketing should be trying to achieve. Yeah. So but the other side of it, and the one that, you know, I think the marketing people probably don't take enough credit for, is profitability. You know, can you get those sales? And as we go into a time of high inflation, pressure from retailers to cut prices and so on, then maintaining profitability will be the one thing that separates successful from unsuccessful businesses. Now, there's an incredibly good paper by Ben Hafeider that I was going back to recently. So I think it was from a couple of years ago, but she and her colleague looked at something like 660,000 small and medium enterprises across Europe using one of the EU databases, and they looked at it over something like 9 years, and they identified companies on a couple of simple measures of profitability and sales, and they looked at companies that grew their sales, companies that improved their profitability, so had sort of success in either of those areas, and they found that the businesses that started by improving their profitability were much more likely to end up being successful businesses than companies that started by trying to grow. So I think the first thing I would say is that if you are just trying to measure your success through growth, you will probably fall off a cliff at some point, because you're not paying enough attention to profitability, and that growth follows profit, not it's not usually the case that profit follows growth. So that's on the financial side. Now, why is that? Because you can invest in a profitable brand, and investment in a brand, whether it's it doesn't have to be in above the line communications. It can be in all the areas from design, product quality, all those things, innovations. Those are all ways in which you improve that set of mental associations that people have, all the connections that they're making in their brain, all the little things that actually add up to making people happy to continue to buy products, to want to try a product in the first place, to enhance the experience when they do try a product, and to make them happy to pay the asking price. So I think for me, it's profit is a great acid test of if you've got a strong brand, because it means that people will want to buy you and pay more than your competitor. So yes, we can measure it through surveys, and actually at Kantar we've just launched a new service through our self-serve marketplace, where you can go and commission a survey on your own brand's equity for just a couple of grand. So it doesn't have to be a big expensive thing to do, but it's about understanding the job of marketing is to create those connections in people's heads that then come together and help people justify a purchase.
I've really enjoyed this. It's kind of just over an hour really flew by. I mean, I could hold you for another hour easily. Is there anything else that you'd like to say before we bring this session to a close? Apart from, of course, read the rankings, download the report,
Yeah, I mean, the report, I mean, to be fair as well, it covers so much more than we've been able
Yeah.
to touch on today. So I think it's working out this year to something like close to 400 pages, I was told. And, you know, there are lots of bits of analysis in there about, you know, growing strong brands. There's lots of analysis and comment on sustainability. There are comments from our experts around the world. There are comments from marketing leaders around the world, people like Heineken and PepsiCo, Mutai in China, and I can't remember who the other one was. Oh, is it RBC, the bank in Canada, Royal Bank of
Yes.
Canada, RBC. So we've got, you know, a fantastic lot of insight there. We cover 13 different categories, as well as generally looking across the most valuable brands. So yeah, you know, there's something in there for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, because I downloaded the stuff from last year and I uploaded it in my learning materials for the brand strategy class that I give at uni, and they found it fascinating and really useful. It really took their writing to another level, because there was some really, it's not just the numbers, it's the way that you explained the numbers and you broke them into categories, and yeah, I mean, fantastic read. It's a must read. So I just want to say thanks very much to both of you for giving me the time, and well, I look forward to the next time.
Absolutely.
Thank
Thanks
you.
very much for having us.
See you
Thank
later,
you.
everybody. Bye.
Cheers all. Bye bye.
Bye.